Don't get drunk and break into the cemeteries in New Orleans. And if you do, don't piss off any of the tombs with a bunch of X marks all over it. I did that 6 days ago, Saturday, and I've died every day since. After leaving the cemetery that night, I stubbed my foot stepping out on the curve and broke my neck on a wall outside a bar. I dreamed of a woman that night. She wore a white dress and stared at me. But I couldn't have dreamed anything. Do the dead dream? Sunday morning, I woke up in my bed with no hangover. I had a clear head, which was rare for me in the morning, but the details of the night before were a little hazy. I checked myself out in the mirror, but didn't see any signs of damage. I remember tripping on the curve, then the wall of the bar rushing up towards me. I was so drunk that I didn't put out my hand to catch myself. Then, only blackness. Pushing the thought away, I started my day. I left my apartment and walked down the block to the corner diner. Most mornings, I needed coffee to chase away my hangover. No hangover that morning, but the craving was still there. I sat at the counter and ordered. A tall, very dark-skinned man was sitting at the counter. He was dressed in an old-fashioned dark purple suit. He had coattails and all. He stood as I sat down and said good morning, and made his way out of the diner. "Be seeing you later," he said to the diner. Everyone ignored him. I turned and looked at him as the door was slowly swishing shut. He tipped his hat to me as he was putting it on. His smile was yellow like his eyes. As the door swung shut, I could see him lighting a cigar. I think he winked at me. After my coffee, I walked over to Jackson Square. Maybe the fortune teller could tell me something. They all turned me down. The real ones did, at least. You can tell which ones are real. After the failure, I walked back towards the river. A carriage horse got spooked by some tourists lighting firecrackers and caved in the side of my head with a kick. Monday, I woke up again in my bed. This was really happening. I searched the news, but there were no stories about a horse killing one on Decatur Street. I gave in and decided that the only thing for me was to get nice and drunk. I was sober for a whole day. That was an accomplishment for me. Well, sober for a morning at least. That night, I tied one on. I couldn't get enough. At one point, I think I remember that tall guy from the diner buying me a drink. "What's this?" I asked, as he handed me a double shot of something dark. "Oh, it's always rum for me, baby," he said, before throwing back his shot. I didn't care. I would have drunk anything that night. "Be seeing you around," he said, before fading into the crowd of the bar. I was shot in the back while walking home. They killed me for the $9 I had in my pocket. In my dreams that night, the lady in white was sitting on a short stool with her back towards me. I walked towards her, but she never turned around. No matter how close I got to her, no matter how far I stretched my hand, I couldn't touch her. Tuesday, I decided to stay in. If I didn't go out, I couldn't die, right? My thought was to drink a fifth of vodka and try to take a bath. I must have passed out because when I came to, the water was freezing. I slipped getting out of the tub and bashed my head on the rim of the toilet. I still couldn't reach the woman in white. She was working with something in her lap. Every time I walked around to her front to see what she was doing, I would just be looking at her back again. Wednesday, I believed the bed would be my sanctuary. Surely nothing bad can happen to you in bed. Things were going well until I smelled the smoke and heard the sirens. The fire must have started in an apartment below me. I threw open my front door and ran for the stairs. They collapsed as I made my way to the landing. Since I was on the top floor, I had nowhere to go. Resigned, I walked back inside. People were staggering out of my building onto the street below. A crowd formed across the street, and some of them were pointing up at my window. The tall man was standing amongst them, smiling up at me. He tipped his hat as my floor collapsed, and I fell into the inferno below. I found out what the woman in white was working with. This time she was standing. She had a dead chicken in her hand. With a quick motion, she twisted and wrenched the head from the bird. She began chanting and moved in a circle, making a ring of blood on the ground around her. I called to her, but she ignored me. Right before I woke up, she glanced up at me, glaring into my eyes. By Thursday, I'd given up. Whatever was happening to me was out of my control. My room was like it always was. No sign of a fire. As soon as I got up, I went straight for Bourbon Street, because the bars never closed there. With an empty stomach, I got to work. Even on Bourbon Street, drunks aren't well tolerated before noon. After getting kicked out of the third bar, I sat down on the curb with a big-ass beer. The tall man sat down beside me. We were quiet for a few minutes before I asked him, "Why is this happening to me?" Now, don't worry about that, Cher. Just a few more days and it'll all be over. Now, if you hurry, there's a party bus carrying a bachelorette party about to cross Bourbon Street just a few blocks that way." He pointed down the street. "The driver is a man a lot like you. He's out way too late last night, and might not have all his faculties about him." I nodded and stood up. The tall man called to me as I walked away. "Au revoir, mon ami." The bus plowed right through the stop sign. He was right. The driver never saw me. The bus squealed to a halt too late, with me trapped underneath. I could smell my skin melting on the scalding undercarriage. The driver ran out and saw what he'd done. He turned away and vomited as the party rushed out of the bus to see what was happening. A pretty lady wearing a sash that read "Bride" saw me and dropped her tall green novelty drink. The last thing I heard was the screams of her and her bridesmaids. The woman in white walked towards me in a dreamy way that night. She held a dusty bottle with no label that was full of some kind of dark liquor. She stood in front of me and took a big pull from the bottle. With a look of disdain, she held the bottle out to me. I reached for it, but she pulled it away and spat the liquor in my face. She began chanting something in French Creole and walked around me in a circle, stopping periodically to tease me by holding the bottle out in front of her. Every time I reached for the bottle, she would pull it away, take another swig, and spit it back in my face. Her chanting continued in between her taunts. Finally, she stopped and stared at me with hatred. "Time to wake up, fool," she said. It wasn't English, but I understood her. She took one more long pull from the bottle, blood beginning to dribble from between her lips, and spewed it back onto me. I shot up from my sleep and was horrified to find my face and chest covered in blood. I cleaned myself up and spent the rest of the day wandering aimlessly around my apartment. Eventually I headed out and walked around the corner until late into the night. The tall man would be waiting for me in the doorway or the window of a bar, always with a shot of rum held out for me. I just ignored him and walked on. Well after midnight, near the edge of the quarter, I saw her waiting for me on a distant street corner. "Last chance, mon cher," said the tall man, from the doorway of a quiet bar. The bar was dark because it was closing up. It was hard to make out the details of his face, but it looked like he was wearing white paint in the shape of a crude skull. I took the offered shot and drank it down slowly, savoring the burn. She rounded the corner, and I followed. As I walked, I lost sight of her, but she would always be there when I turned a corner or a car passed by, just standing and staring at me from a distance. Eventually, I found myself walking next to the tall white wall. An opening in the wall revealed a huge ornate iron gate. I stopped at the gate, and it slowly swung open, creaking on its centuries-old hinges. Of course, back where this all began, the cemetery. My feet carried me down the boulevard of this miniature city of the dead. She was gone again, so I scanned the side alleys for her. I saw a flash of her white dress between the crumbling tombs, so I ventured deeper into the cemetery after her. She was waiting for me next to a tomb. The tall man stood with her. When I stopped in front of them, he turned and removed the name plaque from one of the open crypts. The stale air that billowed out smelled of musty decay. He bowed low and gestured me inside. I began to weep, but I still climbed in. I turned onto my back in the tight space and looked up. He smiled at me and said, "It's been a pleasure. Truly. He lifted the plaque back up and sealed me inside, covering me in sweet darkness. Finally, I can rest. The hissing of steam from the subway grates interrupted the silence of the evening. City lights cast long, menacing shadows over the pavement. Right in front of me, a missing child poster flapped in the breeze. It had been plastered over a lamppost, rain-washed, and barely clinging to it. I had seen that face before. Street vendors sold questionable food, with grease pooling in the grill tops. A thin wisp of smoke emanated from the cart, blending with the city fog. At that hour, only the brave or the foolish roamed the streets. "I told you," a voice sneered, breaking me out of my reverie. I turned to see Marco, an old friend from high school. "Children go missing here every damn week." "And?" I glared. "And nothing," he laughed, taking a drag from his cigarette, the orange glow illuminating his face in a sinister dance. "Just stating the facts." I'd come back to the city after years abroad. Upon my return, the rumors had started. Whispers about children who'd vanished into thin air, never to return. The rumors were suffocating, and their impact on the community was palpable. "Third kid this month," a woman murmured to her friend as they hurried past, clutching their bags tighter, casting suspicious shadows at anyone who dared to make eye contact. "I heard it's a man," said a homeless guy, propped up against a brick wall, a tattered hat placed in front of him with meager coins. "Tall, wears a hat, stalks him, he does." Marco scoffed, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Urban legend. Every city's got one." "Then explain the disappearances," I retorted. He shrugged. "Maybe they ran away. Maybe it's a trafficking ring. Who knows? It's the city. Things happen." My fingers itched to slap the indifference from his face, but the seed of fear had been planted. I started seeing the missing children posters everywhere. Lampposts, bus stops, the mouths of alleyways. One evening, while walking through the park, I saw a group of kids playing. The setting sun cast a golden hue over their innocent faces, their laughter echoing, forming a dark contrast to the tales of horror that loomed large. In the distance, a silhouette stood watching, a man in a hat. I squinted, trying to get a better look, but the figure melted away, almost as if he had never been there at all. The fear grew. Every time I'd heard a child's laughter, my heart would race. Every shadow, every whisper, every creak became a harbinger of doom. The nights were sleepless, the weight of a dark city, secrets that pressed down on me from everywhere. One night I was taking a shortcut through an alley, the familiar sound of children's laughter sending shivers down my spine. I strained my ears, trying to locate the source. It seemed to be coming from an old, dilapidated building, its windows boarded up, a relic from the long-ago past. Against my better judgment, I approached, feeling an inexorable pull. As I neared the entrance, the laughter grew louder, more distinct, but eerily off somehow. It sounded distorted. The front door creaked open, revealing a dark hallway. From within, the giggles continued. My feet moved of their own accord, leading me deeper into that abyss. Each step echoed a rhythmic beat that only seemed to amplify the terror coursing through me. A dim light at the end of the hallway beckoned. The room it led to was bathed in an otherworldly glow. At the center stood a massive mirror, its ornate frame decorated with grotesque faces. The reflection, however, was not my own. Instead, the faces of the missing children stared back, their eyes hollow, their smiles twisted in eternal torment. "Help us," they whispered in unison. From the shadows, a tall figure emerged, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his face. "Another one from my collection," he mused, his voice dripping with malevolence. I tried to move, tried to scream, to do anything, but my feet were rooted to the spot, paralyzed by an unseen force. As the figure approached, the room grew colder, the children's faces in the mirror growing more desperate. The man's hands reached out, inches from my face, and suddenly a blinding light filled the room, a cacophony of sound, sirens, shouts, the distant wails of a child. The spell was broken. I turned and ran, and never looked back. But the nightmare was far from over. I burst into the open night, gulping in the chill air, the neon city lights blurry through my tears. The horrifying vision in the building was imprinted on my mind. Those children, their faces warped with terror, the tall man reaching out for me. The sirens grew louder, reverberating through the empty streets, only to drown out when I stumbled into Marco, a concerned expression replacing his usual indifference. "What happened?" he panted, grabbing my shoulder. "I followed you when I saw you enter that building." But I could only point back to the cursed structure, my voice a mere whisper. "He's in there." Marco's eyes darted to the building, then back to me. Without a word, he pulled me away, ushering me towards the brighter parts of the city, away from the echoing laughter and the haunting shadows. We found ourselves in a 24-hour diner, the sterile fluorescent light seeming alien after the night's events. I narrated everything, and Marco listened intently, occasionally sipping his coffee. "You're lucky to have gotten away," he muttered, tapping his fingers nervously on the counter. "There are legends, you know, of the man in the hat. They say he traps souls, feeds on the innocent." "But why children?" My voice wavered, and the passing waitress shot me a worried glance. Marco sighed. "Children are pure, their energy's untainted. And urban areas, they're hunting grounds, filled with distractions, making them easy to prey on." Dawn approached as we decided to notify the police. Their skepticism was palpable, yet the consistent disappearances provided some weight to our story. They agreed to inspect the building. What they found sent shivers down my spine, and even the most seasoned officer was rattled a little. Inside that room was the mirror, the atmosphere thick, stifling. The walls were lined with old photographs, each displaying a missing child, their eyes vacant. In the center stood the grand mirror, but it was ordinary now, reflecting nothing but the grim faces of the officers. However, the most disturbing discovery was a room concealed behind thick drapes. Inside, a maze of strings connected pinned pictures, notes, bizarre symbols, each thread intertwined, leading to a single image in the center, a sketch of a man in a hat. Below it, a chilling note: "The city feeds, and so shall I." News spread like wildfire. The city was in an uproar. Vigilante groups formed, vowing to hunt down the man in the hat. Parents held their kids close, and the night saw the streets deserted. Weeks turned into months, but the city's palpable fear remained. The disappearances halted, but the memories persisted, a shadow over every home. One evening, as rain lashed the window panes, I received a call, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A raspy voice, dripping with malice, whispered, "You escaped me once, but the city never forgets." Frozen, I could only listen as soft, distorted laughter echoed in the background. I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding. The man in the hat wasn't done. The city's nightmare had only just begun. Despite the overwhelming dread, there was a determination that burned within me. I couldn't let this malevolent entity continue his reign of terror. Teaming up with Marco and a group of other survivors, we decided to delve deeper, to unearth the truth behind this urban legend. Our research led us to an ancient myth, stories of an entity that existed in the shadows, thriving on fear. The more that we feared, the stronger they became. Legends spoke of mirrors as portals, realms where these beings would trap souls, feasting on their essence. We needed to destroy the source of the power. We needed to destroy the accursed mirrors. Armed with tools and determination, we made our way to the building. The entrance seemed more foreboding than before, its dark void beckoning us, challenging us. Inside, the silence was oppressive. The mirror room awaited, the large glass surface reflecting our anxious faces. Taking a deep breath, I swung my sledgehammer. The impact sent ripples across the city. Every street, every home, every heart felt that first strike. As cracks appeared, the trapped souls began to break free. The city, once cloaked in darkness, began to breathe again. But it wasn't over yet. From the mirror's depths, the man in the hat emerged, his form more terrifying than any legend could convey. Our final battle had begun. The room's temperature plummeted. Our breaths were visible, forming vaporous clouds in the freezing air. The man in the hat moved with unnatural speed, a mere blur as he lunged at us. Marco and the others tried to restrain him, but it was like fighting a hurricane. His sheer force was overwhelming. His eyes were pools of infinite darkness locked onto mine, and I felt a pull, an overwhelming desire to succumb. Those eyes were a promise of peace, an end to constant dread, but beneath that, a current of malevolence lurked. "Join the others," he hissed, his voice echoing with the pain and sorrow of all his victims. But I wasn't ready to give up. Remembering the research, I shouted, "Don't look into his eyes. He draws strength from our fear." Distracting him with makeshift weapons and tools, we circled the mirror, chanting an ancient spell we had discovered during our research. The room quaked. The very foundations of the building groaned under the force. The mirror's cracks began to grow, each fracture emitting a piercing scream, the collective voice of the trapped souls demanding release. The man in the hat, his strength waning, tried to retreat into the mirror, to escape the onslaught, but our chants grew louder, drowning out his anguished cries. With one final surge of energy, the mirror shattered, sending shards flying in all directions. The room was engulfed in blinding light, a force so potent it threw us back. As the light dimmed, we slowly got to our feet, taking in the aftermath. The man in the hat was gone. In his place was a pile of ashes and a worn-out hat lying on the floor, marking the end of that ancient terror. The walls, once lined with haunting photographs, now displayed blank frames, their tormented occupants finally free. Exhausted, we made our way out, the first rays of dawn painting the city in hues of hope. The streets, for the first time in months, echoed with genuine, joyful laughter. Children played without fear, families reunited. The weight of the dark past slowly faded away. News of our victory turned us into local heroes, but we knew the truth. The city's true heroes were its inhabitants, their collective spirit and hope being the real force that banished the evil. Yet, the city bore the scars, reminders of its tormented past. The once abandoned buildings became a memorial dedicated to the lost souls, ensuring the city would never forget. Years went by, life moved on, but every now and again on quiet nights, when the city heartbeat slows, whispers rise, of a time when shadows held power, of brave souls who fought back, and of a man in a hat whose reign of terror is no more. However, urban legends have a way of persisting, tales passed down from generation to generation, and while the city had fought off one darkness, who's to say what other horrors lurked in its depths, just waiting for their time to rise? My name is unimportant, but what I do is. I'm a member of an elite unit you'll never hear of. We contain incidences of all kinds. Not only do we deal with physical issues, but we also keep the information from the public. It's better that way. It keeps people from panicking and helps maintain order. I found a notebook on my last mission. Even though it violates the rules, I owe it to the author to tell his story. I know it'll be written off as a conspiracy theory or some crackpot Reddit post, so there's no real danger. At least, I don't think there is. It reads as follows. Here I sit in this moldy, godforsaken cell, awaiting my unfair death sentence to be carried out. I can't stand my neighbors. They're noisy and they stink. It's my own fault, though. If I hadn't been responsible and tried to help, I wouldn't be here right now. Ironically, doing the right thing has doomed me. It all started a long time ago, in a golden age that I like to call last week. Good morning, Miss Watner. You're looking as lovely as ever. For someone who looks so old that even a mummy would turn tail and run. Why, Jonathan, aren't you sweet? Thank you, ma'am. Will that be paper or plastic? Paper, of course. We can always grow more trees, can't we? Yes, ma'am. Maybe one day soon we'll use one to make you a nice coffin. The old crone drifted away, flashing her huge diamond ring and mink coat. I never understood why she bothered to come to the grocery store, when she could always have her servants do it for her. Then it hit me. This was her way of staying in touch with the commoners, of proving to herself that she was still human. I can't blame her too much, I guess. If I was obscenely rich, I'd want to flaunt it too. Uh-oh, looks like Mr. Burgess is heading towards Jane's register. I'd better go help. Jane, you have an urgent phone call in the office. I'll cover for you. A wave of relief washes over her, as panic had started to flood her face. Thank you, she whispered, touching my shoulder and sending warmth through me. Humph, Mr. Burgess mumbled, leering at her as she went. Take away the only good part of my day. Good morning, Mr. Burgess. Are you having a party? I asked, as a dozen cans of Sterno rolled down the belt, followed by 10 boxes of matches and 5 cases of bottled water. Never mind what I'm doing, he growled. Oof, I struggled to stay upright from the stench of alcohol that wafted from his mouth. Yes, sir. That'll be $157.32, please. He grumbled something that I couldn't make out as his gnarled fingers reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 brand new $100 bills. I handed him back his change. You have a nice day now. He shot me a look of scorn mixed with pity, a look I would have expected to see a hunter give to wounded prey. Humph, was all he said as he scuttled out through the door. As I watched him go with the same look of scorn and pity, a man stumbled in. He wasn't remarkable in any way, but something told me to keep an eye on him. He was of average height and size, but he shuffled instead of walked. The look in his eyes was vacant, as if the lights were on, but no one was home. He shuffled past me just as Jane returned to her register. She shot me a look of gratitude with just a hint of affection, but I was too focused to acknowledge it. As if mesmerized, I drifted behind him, trying to remain inconspicuous as he slowly made his way to the pharmacy section. I turned the corner and there he stood, swaying back and forth as though driven by a non-existent breeze. I approached him. Can I help you, sir? As he turned towards me, I could see scratches on his neck and a hint of dried blood under his jacket. He stared at me with those empty eyes. Instinctually, my hand slipped behind my back and grasped the handle of my knife, something I carried for just such an occasion. I set my feet and prepared for him to lunge at me. This is it, I thought. 12 years of working at this menial job have finally paid off. I'm in the right place at the right time to stop the outbreak. I just need to be sure, or I'll spend the next 20 somewhere much worse. I pulled the knife out just an inch when he cleared his throat. Sorry, it's my wife. She isn't feeling well. I slid the knife back into my sheath and said, I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can help you find? His vacant eyes drifted back to the shelf. He picked up a bottle of Midol and a pack of tampons. These should do it. He tried to force a smile and shuffled past me towards the checkout. Something was still nagging at me about him. I went back to my register and bagged groceries while he waited in line. When he shuffled towards the front door, I mumbled something about needing carts and followed him outside. He had parked his car at the edge of the lot, but even partway there, I could see the car he was heading for was rocking back and forth It sounded like someone was pounding from inside. As I approached, I saw blood smeared all over the window, and the face of a large woman pressed against the glass. I was 30 feet away when he reached the car and unlocked the door. "Don't!" I screamed, reaching for the knife, but he'd already pulled the door handle. She exploded out of the car and launched herself at him. He fell backwards, and she began devouring him like a starving lion on its prey. She clawed at him and ripped out his throat with her teeth, making a geyser of blood. He tried to cry out, but all that came out was a bloody gurgle. I shook off the shock of the pure, stark reality of the situation and took advantage of my opening. I held my knife over my head, closed my eyes, and swung as hard as I could. I missed the first try and only managed to slice off her ear. Needless to say, that got her attention. She ceased gouging at him and turned towards me. Crap! I tried to ready myself in a defensive stance, but she lunged at me, growling. I held the knife in front of me and she impaled herself on it. Unfortunately, it sunk into her neck. The force of her impact knocked me onto my back. I nearly lost consciousness when my head bounced off the pavement. My vision swam as she snapped her bloody teeth at me. I held her at bay with the knife that was still lodged in her throat, the same knife I would need to kill her. After a quick moment's thought and a frantic plan, I shoved my forearm into her chest and yanked the knife free. I lost ground in the process and felt her teeth scrape my nose as I swung the knife around and buried it in her ear. It looked like a movie in pause. She stopped with her mouth frozen open, then slowly rolled off of me. I sat up as best I could, stared down at her, pulling my knife out, and then I shoved it in his ear, just to be sure. "Freeze!" came a loud voice from behind me. I turned to see 3 police cars with their lights flashing. 6 officers, all pointing their guns at me. "Drop the knife, get on your knees, lace your fingers behind your head," the officer said. "Are you kidding me? I just saved everyone," I said incredulously. "Do it now or we will shoot you." The knife clattered to the ground as I did as I was told. In a heartbeat, I was cuffed and stuffed, riding towards the station in the back of the police car. "Third-degree murder? Are you nuts?" I yelled at the attorney, seated across the table from me. "That's the best I can do. You brutally murdered 2 people in broad daylight in front of a dozen witnesses." "They weren't people anymore." "Let me guess, you thought they were?" "Yes, I did, and they were." He threw his papers into his briefcase and started towards the door. "I'll register an insanity plea if you want me to." "I'm not insane. You have to listen to me. We can stop it. Find out who those people were and where they were coming from. The police in that town need to be alerted." He rolled his eyes. "I already know who they were and where they were from. Michael and Sara Weston. They lived right here in Frost Creek. They both worked at the hospital. She was a nurse and he worked in maintenance." I slumped in my chair. It's over. There's no way I can stop it if it started in town. The guards took me back to my cell, where I sat in quiet desperation, trying to decide what to do next. I took the tablet and the pencil I'd been given when I was booked, and started writing this as a bit of a history. Right now, it's just so I can keep the events straight in my own head. I'm calling it Dear John, a letter to the undead. By the time I'm done writing this, there won't be anyone left alive to read it. It only started yesterday, back when my life was uncomplicated and boring. When I was done writing, my wrist hurt. Logging down the demise of humanity will do that. I tried to warn the officers when they would pass my cell at mealtime. It became a litany. Is there anything strange going on in town? Do you have enough food, water, and ammo at home? Is your family someplace where you can protect them? My concern was met with scorn and even alarm. I guess they felt threatened by my questions. I don't know why. After a while, the officers came through less and less. That was when it happened. My cell window looked out towards a truck stop. I was lying on my bunk when I felt as much as heard the explosion. I jumped up and stared in shock as the tanker truck was up in flames, sending black smoke pouring into the air. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and still no fire trucks had arrived. With little wind, the smoke had settled at street level, making visibility near zero. An hour later, the wind picked up and blew away the haze just enough to see the sun riding low on the horizon. That's when I saw them. They were shambling through the haze, unfocused with no direction. They just came. I watched with a helpless detachment, knowing that there was nothing I could do about it. I heard the first gunshot a few minutes later.
They shambled into the cell block, 2 and 3 at a time. It didn't take long for the smell of rotting flesh to surround my cell, reaching through the bars like groupies at a rock concert. Thank God there was a wall behind me. I watched in hopeless fascination as the inmates in the cell next to me got too close to the bars and were torn apart. So here I sit, the putrid scent of death and decay overwhelming me, but no more than the knowledge that I could have stopped this, or at least warned people if I hadn't been arrested. The least I can do is write this letter to whoever might be left alive to read it. So maybe they know how this whole thing began, and it might help them in some small way. Day 2. I can honestly say that this is the first time I've ever entertained the thought of drinking out of the toilet. Thirst is driving me mad, though, and the sink is unfortunately located next to the bars. My guests have not gotten bored and moved on like I thought they would. If anything, they seem to have doubled in numbers. On the plus side, all the growling and jostling kept me awake so that I wouldn't have to worry about being grabbed in my sleep. No, I can be sure I'll be awake and alert so that I feel every set of teeth as I'm slowly devoured. It's always good to think positively. One of the deputies has made his way to the front of the cell. The keys to the cell dangle tantalizingly from his belt. I'm hypnotized by them. I could go insane just thinking about the possibilities. But the fact of the matter is, I know I'd be dead before I shoved the key in the lock. It does make me smile, though, knowing that the Walking Dead are too brainless to realize that they literally hold the keys to my demise. Day 3. I did it. I'm not proud of it, but the overwhelming thirst drove me to it. Unfortunately, there's not much left in the bowl. I flushed to see if the water level would rise again, but it didn't. I've kept the bowl clear of contamination, though. I have taken some small measure of revenge against my future killers by relieving myself in their open mouths. I've become a fairly accurate shot, too. I stand just out of reach and then fire away. They do draw back from it, but I don't really know why. I'm sure it doesn't even register in their dead brains. It's still strange, though. The ones that I hit don't return. Day 4. I can't stand the relentless, overwhelming, crushing thought that I'm powerless, that at some point I'll succumb. I'm gonna try to grab the keys. I don't know what I'll do from there, but it's clear that help isn't coming. If I want to survive, I'll have to do it on my own. Day 5. This will be my last entry. I can't believe what a fool I was. Even though I was able to grab the keys, I paid for it dearly. 2 of them got a hold of my arm and bit right through it. I wrenched away with all my strength, screaming in sheer agony as my injured arm ripped away from my body, leaving them with a snack and me with a bloody stump. I'm bleeding as I write this. I haven't even tried to stop it. I'd rather die this way than be ripped to pieces by those creatures. At least it's on my terms, not theirs. If someone finds this, I hope that something in these pages will be of some help. I only wish it could be more. Maybe by keeping these creatures distracted here, someone else is having a fighting chance to escape. I hope so. Goodbye. I destroyed the notebook. Standard procedure. Contain the threat, contain the information. That's what we do. It was a big deal locally, but we were able to keep it out of the national news. We told the public there was a toxic gas leak that made people sick, but that it was being contained. The explosion at the gas station was covered as a random accident. It did help us with cleanup, though. Nothing like a giant fire to throw all the undead bodies on. I salute the unfortunate soul for his brave sacrifice. I just wish we'd been called in sooner. We might have been able to save him.
Teddy and I had been working at Disney for years. The 2 of us had seen hundreds, if not thousands, of young cast members come and go, heading off to college or to better jobs and brighter futures. Meanwhile, the 2 of us stuck around and became a running joke to some of the younger employees, since we were never promoted to management, that is. Most of the lower-level members were young, in their early 20s or late teens, and to them, it was just a part-time gig, a way to raise money for college or to pass a bit of time until their real lives and careers began. But Teddy and I were lifers, and some would say losers, although I would never attach that label to myself willingly. I'd heard it whispered enough times to know that it was what other people thought of us. We'd both been there for nearly 2 decades, and had worked on pretty much every single attraction, but had never been deemed responsible enough to be promoted to supervisor status. Over all that time, I found a lot of secrets about the place. Some things that are known to the public, but also some revelations that aren't talked about anywhere. Did you know that cast members who work as mascots have to wear communal underwear? Yeah, that's right. They all share the same underoos, and they get washed in between uses. At least, in theory. Who knows what pervert came up with that idea? Or how about the fact the skeleton on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride was originally constructed out of real bones? Despite the park's insistence that all the bones were removed, a few still remain. Management lost track of which were real and which were fake, and they just left the real ones in there along with the imposters. But when you're up close, it's easy to tell them apart. The real ones are a little more yellow, and they're heavier than the plaster ones. There are plenty of morbid secrets like that. People scatter the ashes of their deceased loved ones in the park so frequently, we actually have a not-so-subtle code name for it. A white powder alert. The Haunted Mansion and the Pirates of the Caribbean are the most common places, but it's done all over, and who knows how often people get away with it without even being noticed. Code 101 means a ride is temporarily shut down, while Code V, or a protein spill, means that someone has vomited on a ride and it needs to be cleaned up. Those spills are often the cause of ride shutdowns, rather than mechanical issues. Oh, and if you hear yourself or someone else being referred to as a treasured guest, it doesn't mean you're a VIP. It's actually our code word for saying you're being an asshole. There are stories of ghosts, some told by people who never believed in such things before witnessing them in the park. The specter of Walt Disney himself has been seen a couple of times, outside Sleeping Beauty's castle just on the other side of the drawbridge. Or sometimes he's seen at night just outside his old apartment on Main Street, where occasionally you might smell a whiff of cigarette smoke, despite the fact that such things are banned inside the park. Walt and his family once lived there, so they could spy on visitors and listen to their opinion on the park. They would eavesdrop on their conversations from the second-floor apartment, just above the street level. George, a dead electrician, supposedly haunts the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and every morning, cast members must call out, "Good morning, George," at the start of the day. Otherwise, the ride will mysteriously have issues all day long. Unexpected shutdowns and other strange things often occur if George isn't given his proper morning greeting. And have you heard about the animatronics in It's a Small World running all night long? Yep, those rumors are true too. In fact, quite a few of the lifelike robots stay in motion 24/7, even throughout the lockdown and park shutdowns a couple of years back. If you ask the management about it, they'll tell you it's because the attractions are cheaper to maintain that way. They break down less frequently if they're in constant motion. That's the excuse we get anyway. But I've come to realize there might be far more terrifying reasons for this. Something so disturbing and twisted that I wouldn't have thought it was possible if I hadn't witnessed it for myself. Teddy and I were on our lunch break when we found the storage room. We were looking for somewhere a little more private since Teddy had brought a bit of homemade greenery and his favorite piece of glassware that day. The park has miles and miles of tunnels crisscrossing beneath it, and Teddy and I had explored most of the labyrinth over our years of service. Like everything else in the park, there was a stupid nickname for these underground tunnels. They had been dubbed utilidors by some management types in the distant past. Most of the cast members just called them the tunnels, and they were so vast we often used golf carts to get from one end of them to the other. There were odd dead ends at some of the tunnels that seemed to intentionally lead to nowhere. We were currently in one such useless utilidor, when we noticed an odd-looking door which appeared to be at least half a century old, if not more. It had a rusted placard hanging over its surface which read, "Obsolete animatronic storage." "Hey, didn't there used to be a vending machine there?" Teddy asked. "Who cares? Let's see if it opens. We've only got 20 minutes left," I said, looking at the time on my cell phone. The doorknob turned in my hand, and the two of us went inside. I looked for a light switch on the wall to my right, but I didn't find one. It was pitch black and impossible to see anything. Using the flashlight on my phone, I cast a beam of light around the room, trying to see what kind of space we were in. There were people-shaped forms all around us, draped in tarps and tablecloths. The room was as long as a football field, but it was narrow, only about 15 feet across. "Creepy," Teddy said, taking the words right out of my mouth. Well, I guess it did say this was animatronic storage. This must be really old. He wandered away from the door, and it clicked shut behind him. Something about that made me nervous, but I had ignored the feeling. The door had been unlocked, and that meant we'd be able to get out again. Still, I reached for the knob to check it. My hand was about to touch the polished brass when Teddy called out, making me jump. "Whoa! Check this out!" he said, sounding excited. I left the door, turning around to see what he was looking at. He had his cell phone light on as well, and was lifting up one of the tarps to look at what was underneath. "Man, this thing's freaky looking." He pulled the tarp away, and I saw what he meant. The thing hidden beneath was very creepy. It had the goateed face of a young man, but the ears and nubby horns of a goat, looking far too real. Its lower half looked like it also belonged to a goat. The thing reminded me of a satyr, those drunken, lustful half-goat gods from Greek mythology. I tried to figure out why it was making me feel so uneasy, and realized it was the eyes. They were too lifelike, far more real than the animatronics out in the park. And the look of the skin, the way it reflected the light and anything about it, it looked like it was a real creature. More likely, a man had been sewn to the body of a goat in a very thorough way, making the seams blend together perfectly. Teddy was already moving on to the next one, looking under another tarp. He left me alone with this one, and I looked back down at it as I let go of the cover and let it fall across its face again. Flinching backwards, I nearly screamed, as I could have sworn the eyes of the thing were looking at me, just as I dropped the tarp over its face. My heart was beating fast, and I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, or that the eyes had been looking up that way the whole time, and I just hadn't noticed. "We need to go," I heard myself say, but Teddy wasn't listening. "Holy crap, this one's even more jacked up. Dude, you gotta check this out." I opened my mouth to say, "No, let's get out of here," but my words caught in my throat. The satyr creature under the tarp was clearly moving now. Its head was still draped in the plastic sheet, but I could see it turning to look at me, as if its gaze could penetrate through the tarp. "Dude, come check this out," Teddy was yelling, pulling the next sheet off and dropping it to the floor. I saw what he was referring to, my eyes drawn to it despite the terror of the draped creature just in front of me. This one was tall, standing nearly 10 feet. It had one large eye instead of two. Man, whoever made these things was tripping on acid or something. Look at this thing. It looks like they jacked an eye from an elephant and stuffed it in some dude's forehead. I think they were trying to make a cyclops. I could barely hear him, as now the thing in front of me wasn't the only figure in the room which was moving. To my left, the entire row of covered forms were beginning to stretch and turn as they woke up from whatever sleep they had been in. Some were tall, some were short, like the satyr thing on my right, but all of them were alive. I realized it was very cold all of a sudden, and realized I could see my breath steaming out in the air. A compressor groaned to life, and I saw a nearby vent cough out a frosty plume as if something had been jammed or broken and was suddenly operating again. The temperature in the room began to plummet, and a second later, I was freezing cold, the rushing air chilling the back of my neck. Finally, I was shocked out of my stupor and managed to get a word out. "Teddy!" I croaked, but too late. The giant Cyclops hand shot out and grabbed my friend by the throat. It lifted him up into the air while his legs kicked and his arms thrashed, trying to break its grip. He was choking and sputtering, flailing madly as he tried to free himself. The Cyclops firmly held him by the throat, and I heard the sound of cartilage and bones being crushed. His spine popped, and his head bent back at an impossible angle, his skull lolling backwards like a broken Pez dispenser. And then the giant dropped him to the concrete floor of the room, and his phone clattered and turned over, casting half the room in darkness again. I backed away, feeling like I was moving in slow motion, but unable to go any quicker. Reaching back for the doorknob, it felt like the tunnel had grown by 100 feet. It was further away than it could possibly have ever been. I kept backing up, taking slow, quiet steps. The figures were moving towards me, all of them closing the gap and slowly walking in my direction. Their forms were covered, draped in bed sheets and tarps and tablecloths, as if this place had been thrown together in a hurry, hastily constructed to house these possessed animatronics or whatever these creatures were. Cold air was filling the room, making it even more difficult to move. My skin felt like it was being stabbed with pins and needles, the freezing wind going right through my summer clothes. There was a sound of tearing flesh and blood being spilled. I looked to see several of the monsters were tearing the skin from Teddy's face, peeling it from his bones with some difficulty, like trying to open an underripe orange. The worst part was, it looked like he was still alive. He was opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water, his eyes wide open as if he'd be screaming if he were capable of it. I tried to tear my eyes away from it, but I couldn't. I found myself staring at him as they took the flesh off his face. I backed up hard into something and realized it was the door. In the darkness, I felt for the doorknob behind me, but I couldn't find it. The creatures were still moving towards me, all of their faces covered by sheets except for the massive Cyclops that had killed my friend. Its one huge eye was fixed on me, and as it moved in lockstep with the other creatures, they all seemed to share one hive mind. As they approached, a few stepped on each other's coverings, tearing them away and revealing their hideous faces. I saw a woman's upper body sewn onto the legs of a deer, and a man with the hindquarters of a bull, their faces full of mute anger. My hand groped for the doorknob desperately, and after several long moments, it settled on the smooth brass. It was so cold, almost frozen. I spun around, expecting the doorknob to turn easily, but this time it was stuck. I couldn't tell if it was locked or frozen solid, but either way it wouldn't budge. Feeling like there would be icy hands around my throat at any second, I was too terrified to turn around. I heard the sound of shuffling feet moving closer, the icy wind blowing through my clothes and raising goosebumps on my skin. I began pounding against the door with my fists, banging on it as hard as I could as I screamed for help, pleading for someone to save me. "Help! Help! Open the door!" I yelled at the top of my lungs. The corridor we had entered was a dead end, rarely used by anyone. Of course, this door would be locked from the inside, I thought to myself. Who would offer an escape to these animatronic demons? If they had ever been imbued with any form of failsafe, it was long ago out of commission and useless. These creatures had no mercy and no respect for human life. They wanted blood and flesh and meat to create more of themselves, to raise an army of undead robotic soldiers. Manic thoughts were racing through my head as I tried to think of another way out. There had to be something, some other way out. I turned around, hoping for some other exit to present itself, but instead I just saw hundreds of shrouded forms stepping closer and closer until they were just a few feet away. A gurgling, wheezing sound could be heard from behind them, and I realized it was the labored breathing of Teddy slowly dying. If I didn't get out of here, I'd be next. With one desperate move, I kicked out towards the head of the nearest shrouded figure. It was the satyr. My foot connected with his face, and as it did, the entire crowd fell back a step, as if hurting one of them would hurt all of them. I lashed out with another blow, punching it in the gut, and the crowd took another wounded step backward. I used the newfound space to my advantage and took a short running start towards the door. Kicking it hard with my boot, I connected squarely with the spot behind the doorknob. It rattled in the frame, but it didn't budge. Taking a quick look back over my shoulder, I saw the crowd of animatronic creatures were coming at me again with renewed anger. They looked furious at me for assaulting one of them, and apparently I had injured it. The satyr was slumped forward, its joints making creaky noises as it made its way towards me, its movements jerky and disorganized. I kicked the door again, harder this time, using every ounce of force I could muster. I heard something splinter and break, but it still wouldn't budge. Icy hands grabbed my throat from behind, and I threw an elbow backward to try to break free. It connected with whatever had grabbed me, and it didn't let go. Instead, its grip tightened, choking and squeezing my throat until I couldn't breathe. I let out another strangled cry for help, but no sound came out this time. The grip on my windpipe was making it impossible to call out. My feet were going numb from the cold, which seemed to have intensified even more somehow. I hadn't thought it was possible to feel any colder, but I realized that whoever was controlling the temperature of this place was doing this on purpose. These things didn't like the cold, and it put them in a state of hibernation. For some reason, this place had been almost room temperature when we entered, bringing these creatures back to life. With one more desperate effort, I lifted my leg and kicked as hard as I could, my heel connecting with the door just beside the latch. Something shattered and broke loudly, and the door swung open on its hinges. The momentum brought me forward, and I found myself tumbling back into the corridor. Whatever had grabbed hold of me came with me, the icy hand still around my neck. As I landed, the thing's fingers broke off like icicles, shattering on impact. The shrouded creature was writhing on the floor, looking as if it wanted to get up and chase me, but wasn't quite capable of it yet. It was still too cold. I stumbled to my feet and ran from there, not really thinking about my mistake until I was far past that point. When it occurred to me what I had done, it was too late. I had let those things out. I'd opened the door and freed them, and I had allowed the warm air inside so they could come back to life and escape. I was too terrified to stay in the park. I went home immediately without saying a word to anyone, then called my boss and told him I was sick with a stomach flu. I apologized, saying I'd been throwing up in the bathroom and didn't want to cause a code V while on stage. He told me that was okay, since he knew I was a dedicated employee, trusted cast member who had been with the park for years. But he did ask if I'd seen Teddy, and I had to lie and tell him I hadn't. I'm supposed to go back to work tomorrow, for the first time since all of this happened. The worst part about it, nobody has reported Teddy missing. His family hadn't called to say anything either. It's almost like none of it ever happened, except I've got the marks around my neck, the bruises that prove I didn't imagine it. I just got a strange message from Teddy on his cell phone. He says, "See you at work tomorrow, buddy," accompanied by a mouse emoji. Me and some of the cast members have a big surprise for you. The Humvee's brakes squealed as the driver downshifted to take a sharp right. Then we came to a stop. "All right, gents, you know the drill," Sergeant Stafford yelled out. This was the 19th house search we'd had today, and quite frankly, we were all getting sick of it. My boots hit the sand, and I slung my rifle over, getting a good grip on it. An exhalation of exhaustion and boredom was heard from all the guys as we approached the door. "You think we'll catch this one red-handed, Ellis?" Ray grinned at me. "Oh yeah, pants around his ankles and all. God, I felt embarrassed for that guy." We stacked up for our routine formation at the door.
Corporal Martinez approached the front, lowering his rifle. He took a quick charge up and punted the door wide open. "Move, move, move!" I swung around the right corner, scanning the area, and I had Ray on my rear checking the front. It was a kitchen area. Busted cupboards, disgusting-looking tiles. The whole place reeked of old carpet and mold. I felt Ray's hand on my rig, indicating for me to press on. I rushed forward in a controlled manner and felt the 6 pairs of footsteps trailing behind me. The living room was clear, and we headed for the stairs, located at the far left. I heard some rummaging upstairs, so I indicated to Sergeant Stafford in the rear to swap me out. I quickly rushed along the right side of the column, swapping with Private Ashford, who carried the team's big-ass shotgun. Ashford excitedly raised his weapon, waiting for the tap. I was now in the 4th position, carefully threading into the stack. My eyes were constantly darting left and right, looking for the open back door or window or what have you. We started moving up the stairs, hugging the wall tightly. Reaching the turn in the staircase, Ashford confidently swung the corner. Having a little visibility over Mendez's shoulder, I saw him freeze. His face turned pale in a matter of seconds, the clacking of his rifle sling indicating his violent shaking. Ashford moved to the fore, 6 shots fired in the direction of something upstairs. Contact! Private Watford swung around Ashford to provide greater suppression fire and move up the stairs to unclog the stack. An ear-piercing sound came from upstairs, the chaos ensuring the formation was disoriented, along with the noise, and I began to feel nauseous. Grabbing Martinez's collar, I tugged him down the stairs to free the staircase for engagement. As we were moving down the stairs, I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a woman, entirely covered in bullet holes, dashing towards Ashford. Click, click, click. His gun ran dry, and it was already too late. The hellish creature, dripping blood and having a few pieces of meat barely holding its limbs together, closed the distance between him and snapped his neck with an inhuman amount of force. A magazine dumped by Watford led him to the same fate. Having it turned towards us, I caught some details of what it looked like. Its face was hollow, cheeks sunken in, eye sockets empty. Saying it was pale would be an understatement. Freakishly skinny and tall, completely destroyed by bullet holes. Its nails were probably the size of half a knife. Our whimpers and curses were muffled by the sound of the automatic fire and ejecting magazines. It was not phased. "Get down!" The familiar sound of a grenade being ejected from the grenade launcher tube echoed from behind me. I dove to the left, managing to pull Martinez down just in time, and an explosion followed. Then, it was just darkness. My ears were ringing, face full of dust. Aching pain in my left leg stuck as I attempted to get up. I slowly opened my eyes, glaring at the flickering light from the ceiling. I glanced to my right, but Martinez wasn't there. That's when I spotted all the bodies. Sergeant Stafford, Corporal Smith, PFC Arethus. I whimpered in fear as I dragged my ass towards the wall, breathing heavily. I felt my rifle under my right hand and gripped it tight. Another detailed look towards the deceased, and I spotted Martinez too. Hunched over on a chair, head hung backwards, throat slashed open. Ray. I didn't see Ray anywhere. I had to find him. I pulled myself up, nearly collapsing. A quick glance down towards my knee revealed the issue. A huge piece of debris had lodged itself in there. I pulled it out, letting out a groan and a few quick breaths. Dragging that leg behind and pushing myself off the wall, I started moving upstairs. "Ray! Where are you, man?" I turned the corner of the stairs and realized why Ashford froze. The upstairs area was a large living room. In there, neatly arranged, were about 14 to 15 chairs. Sitting in them with perfect posture were corpses. The corpses of recon squads that went missing earlier today. In the farthest chair to the right, I spotted Ray. He was alive. Started making my way up the stairs, and I saw his eyes widen and his lips attempt to say something. "I'm coming, man. Just hold on." "Ellis, on the ceiling." My blood ran cold and my eyes widened. In a split second, my heart rate doubled, and I was clenching my jaw so hard I could have easily broken it. Slowly, raising my glance and rifle towards the ceiling, I saw it. Head slightly tilted to the right, hanging onto the ceiling with those ridiculously long legs. Its thinning hair hung down, drenched in blood, inches from my face. It let out a sickening gurgle or a groan before striking at me. I woke up in one of those chairs. I glanced to my left and noticed Ray wasn't there. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the next room. I dove out the window and crawled away, giving it a quick glance backwards. It was staring at me, its hollow face replicating what would have been a smile on a human. Its arms moved up, raising something. I caught a glance of a familiar blonde head. Ray, I'm so sorry, man.